Welcome to Creative Minds Lab. Today's episode is a little bit unusual, but I will tell you why in a second. My guest is Dr. Nicholas Cooke. He did his master's in fine art. Recently, he got his PhD, which focuses on creativity in electronic music production. Fun fact, I actually saw Nick graduating because we were at the same graduation ceremony at Newcastle University. In case of our discussion, I have also quite a lot of notes from today. And why is it unusual? Because Nick, he is a musician himself, a music producer. However, we weren't talking about his practice, but instead about different theories around creative thinking, the philosophies of creativity. Some of the ideas that we are going to discuss is this idea of creativity as a dialogue. We were talking about the perceptions and different understandings that we have of the topics, and he will give you a very nice introduction to that. We also mentioned the idea of mastery and this way of thinking that artworks are the representations of different moments in our lives. Before we go to the conversation itself, I would like to tell you more about the Creative Minds Lab. This is the podcast, but we also have a creative community, which I really encourage you to join. If you are any type of an artist, or maybe you are an entrepreneur, maybe you are a teacher, maybe you are not only a visual artist, but you are also a musician, or you are a poet, join our creative community. There we support each other, there you can share your works, there you can connect with like-minded people. Okay, that's everything from me. Let's go to the conversation. Nick, please tell us more about yourself.
Hi, Jakob. I'm Dr. Nicholas Cooke. Nick. I've recently finished writing a PhD, which focuses on creativity in electronic music production and kind of theories of creativity and philosophies of creativity more widely. Come from a music background, as you can probably tell with all this stuff, which is not just the show. So that was really my background for a long time. But then I went back to academia. I did a master's in fine art and kind of rolled straight onto the PhD. And now I've sort of completed that, and I'm doing research at Newcastle Uni, and I'm in talks with major publishers to get my first book out, which will hopefully be in all good bookshops and all bad bookshops at some point in the not too distant future. So yeah, thanks for having us, man.
Okay, so for sure we will talk about this book and all the other things. Actually, I know that you have some notes prepared, like a nice structure. So please tell me, what would you like to start with?
Yeah, well, because we had this conversation, didn't we, yesterday, where we were sort of saying, like, we were talking about different types of interview that you can have around this subject, you know?
Yeah.
And I've done a lot of these interviews in the past, right? Both for like my thesis and also, and you'll have experienced this as well, Jakob. Like, I mean, I've been making music full time now for like 25 years, right? Because I'm old as fuck. And so I spent a lot of that time, most of that time, having conversations with creative people about creativity in a either directly or usually in like a more roundabout sort of way. And everybody watching this who's a creative person, who's an artist, who's whatever, will have experienced the same thing. So what I've tend to find is like those conversations when they're sort of unstructured or when they're kind of not focused on particular aspects of creativity, you quite often end up having the same sort of conversations. So it's like, that's cool and it's interesting and it's fun to talk about, right? But for me personally, I tend to feel that like I've had so many of those conversations that like I don't want to go into new conversations and just repeat the same old stuff, right? Because that's boring. Because I mean, you know, it's boring for me to talk about, and if it's boring for me to talk about, it's probably boring for you to listen to, right?
I'm wondering, when did you actually notice that those conversations were like so similar to each other? After
Well,
how many of them?
yeah, a lot, thousands, 25 years, basically.
That's good for you. I'm
Yeah,
24 years old right now, so I'm kind of just starting, well, without including like the first 10
yes,
years of my life. But
yeah.
wow.
Yeah. So anyway, right. So, oh, this is my cat, by the way. She'll probably be
Oh,
popping in and out at various points. Um, yeah. So with that said, right, what I thought I would do is kind of just focus things a little bit and talk about what creativity actually is, like in a sort of philosophical sense, in an academic sense, and just kind of cover the subject behind the subject, right? Because if you go to creative people and you talk about with them about creativity, what they'll give you is they'll talk a lot about their creative experiences and their kind of their own personal understandings and things like that, right? But what they often won't be able to do is if you say, right, well, what is creativity? Very few people can answer that question, right? And that's I struggle to answer that question, yeah.
same,
And like,
same here.
yeah, the reason for that, right, is it's a fucking big topic. Like, it's a big question. It's like saying, what does it mean to be human? And it's like, well, how am I supposed to answer that question, right? You can't. So, so what we kind of go through do instead is kind of go through a few kind of aspects of creativity, and just sort of discuss kind of different elements, because it's impossible to like sum up in a couple of sentences without it being trite. So it's like you really do have to get into the weeds a little bit with some of these ideas.
Maybe
Um,
actually it will be nice if you'd like just uh in a few points just say what topics we are going to cover so that the people who will listen to it they will know
yeah.
what this conversation will be about.
Okay. Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, there's a load of different ways you can structure this, but I just kind of figured the ones that would, the kind of topics that I'm kind of most interested in at the moment. So you've got things like how you develop your creative practice as an artist, like how you get started doing it, and what that means, creative processes, the sort of relationships that you have with the field that you're working in, motivations for creativity, and then sort of towards the end, we'll kind of sum up a little bit and we'll go over like ways that you can be more effective, ways that you should try and conceptualize what you're doing, shape your thinking a little bit to make you more effective at whatever your creative practice happens to be. Okay.
That
So
sounds like a very exciting episode. Okay,
cool.
let's go
All
for
right.
it.
So yeah, in order to do that, I think probably the first thing that you'll need to do, or like your audience will need to do, is we've got to confront what's sort of a little bit of an uncomfortable truth, right? And that is, right, most of what you think you know about creativity is probably wrong. Okay, right? And there's a good reason for that, right? The reason for that is most people, and I include myself in this until pretty recently, until I really started to understand it in depth, right? Is that we tend to view the the things that we do and the creative practices that we engage in and the kind of um, cultural fields that we're involved with, we tend to view those in a sort of in a sort of heliocentric sense with ourself, with the individual at the very heart of the process.
Hmm.
Okay. But actually, when you kind of dig into it, you start to realize that actually it doesn't really work like that. How it works is instead of being at the very center of our creative universes, what we are is we are catalysts for the creative universe, right? For, if you like, if you want to go really far out, right? What we're doing when we sit down and paint or write or make music, whatever, is we are, in a sense, catalyzing the infinite, right? And
Can you
that is a,
clarify it?
yeah, that's a really big statement, right? But I shall explain, okay? So in academia and in a philosophical sense, the sort of prevalent view of creativity is one that's based around a concept called constructivism. And I won't go into a lot of detail about these academic concepts because, like I was saying earlier to you, Jakob, it's not that interesting for most people. So constructivism, what constructivism means, right, is that everything we know, everything that we understand, every way that we know how to act in any given situation is the result of social inculcation, social interaction, social dialogue, one form or another, right? There are many, many, many different forms. We're going to cover a sort of bunch of them here. But all you really need to know for that, right, is that through constructivism, what that means in terms of our creative practice is that when we're drawing ideas from the social world and the experiences that we've taken part in, the kind of dialogues that we've had, direct, indirect, or whatever, okay, when we draw from them, what we're really drawing from in a constructivist sense, right, is this kind of collectivized set. Well, I say set, it's infinite. This collectivized mass, if you can even call it a mass, of thought, of feelings, of ideas, of concepts, and we're filtering them, right? We're filtering them through our own experiences. And so we're catalyzing, but the way that we catalyze is unique to each individual because each individual develops the way that they catalyze as an individual. So
Like
while
unique
we kind of,
filters.
sorry?
Like unique filters.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah.
So while we have to kind of abandon this idea of the self as the center of everything, right? There's still individuality within that. There's still a freedom within that because nobody develops their understandings in quite the same way. And that's what makes us all unique in how we go about doing everything in life, right? So yeah, so when we're kind of starting from this point, right, we need to think about creativity as it's always a dialogue. It's social dialogue, cultural dialogue, right? It's conversations with the infinite, right? And the reason that I say it's infinite, by the way, is that, right, when you start to break these things down, right, when you start to think, okay, so, right, I mean, I'll always go back to music when I give examples because that's what I know the most about, okay? But if, for you or the audience or whoever, if you want to like mentally substitute that for an element of your own creative practice, then it will still apply in the same way. Okay, so it's really the examples that just illustrate points. So the
Excellent.
reason that it's
Let's go.
infinite,
Yeah.
yeah, the reason it's infinite. Okay, so let's say if I sit down to write a piece of music. Okay, so let's say if I want to, I'm going to kind of narrow the scope a little bit. Let's say if I want to write a piece of rock music. Okay, so what I would do, in order to understand how I would write a piece of rock music, I would think, or either consciously or my kind of subconscious would kind of present it to me. I would think, right, I probably want to have some guitars. I want to have a bass guitar, maybe, I don't know, some keyboards, drums, etc., etc., etc. Right? But then you kind of think, okay, well, why do I understand that? Right? Why do I understand that as the starting point for rock music? Okay. And then you start to think, okay, well, I understand that as the starting point for rock music because all the rock bands that I've listened to over the years, have got like guitars and bass and keyboards and drums, right? And then you start to think, okay, well, why do those bands, why do they understand that, right? Why do they understand to have guitar, bass, keyboards, drums, etc.? And then you think, well, okay, so the guys before them, like let's say blues musicians, they were using like guitars and stuff, and maybe they would have like a double bass, or maybe they would have like, you get these, a lot of these great sort of blues artists like Lead Belly, all this sort of stuff, and known as just being a bloke with a guitar, okay? And you can and then you can go back to that, right? And you can go, okay, right, so why does Lead Belly do it this way, right? And it just goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on. There's always a why, right? So it's turtles all the way down, so to speak, yeah?
Yeah.
And what that means is that all of this layers up, and then all these kind of influences for every element of understanding, there's always more that you can add to it. And so what you have, it never ends, right? So it's infinite. Okay, so we're catalyzing that, even though we're not aware that we're doing it a lot of the time. We're catalyzing not just our ideas, but the ideas that formed those ideas, and the ideas who formed the ideas who formed those ideas, and the ideas who formed the ideas who formed the and it's on and on and on and on and on and on. It never stops, right?
The question.
Yeah.
If I want to, let's say, create something completely, okay, not completely new, but different from what was created so far, then should I bring elements that are very different from what was already there. Like, for example, if I don't want to create a rock music, then I actually take the elements, I don't know, like flute or violin or some
Don't know
electronic
what rock
music.
music you're listening to, but with flutes and violins
I
in it.
mean,
But like, I'm into it. I would listen to it.
if my aim is to create something new, then
Yeah,
should I
yeah,
just start with elements that are
no,
not out there?
yeah.
Is it like a recipe for something original?
No, no, yeah, that's a really common thing in creativity. I call it cross-pollination. And what that says is that like often like a lot of the most interesting creative ideas will kind of sit on these permeable boundaries between concepts or between fields or whatever, right? So with you with your rock music and and you want to incorporate, let's say, classical elements, okay? So you would start drawing elements from your rock understanding, but also your classical understanding,
Mhm.
and then all the other understandings, and you would start to kind of blend all that together, right? But then, of course, keep in mind that while you're doing that, it's just an even more of infinity that you're drawing from, right?
Yeah,
So it's even when you're doing that, do that. That's like it's interesting, it's different, and it's fun. Remember, right? When we're creating stuff, we want to enjoy what we're doing, right? It's an inherently enjoyable activity, whatever, especially in the arts, right? I mean, the sciences and academia and a lot of other things. All chefs, really creative people. Like your high-end chefs, right? Don't limit it to the arts. I talk about creativity. I'm talking really broadly,
yeah.
right? But
How
obviously,
broadly? How broadly? Can you give an examples that some people would not include?
um, I mean, there's all sorts. Like, I mean, with chefs, of course. There's like skateboarders can be really creative, coming up with new tricks, new
Hmm.
ideas. It's like, I mean, it's like pick something. There's going to be a creative element there. At some point and somewhere. Um,
Hmm.
so it's
Parenting. Would you include
pardon?
it?
Yeah,
Parenting.
yeah. You could be in parenting, sure. Why not, man? I mean, probably best not to go too wild with it, but like you could certainly, yeah, but you could do something a little bit
What
different with
about
that.
being a serial killer?
A serial killer.
It's a dark part of
It's
being
yeah, it's
creative.
very dark, but I suppose maybe I don't know. It's the psychology of that is kind of too complicated for me to comment on. But I don't know. Maybe probably you can't kind of people who do those kind of horrendous things. You can't kind of relate to them in the same standards that we
Okay.
as normal sort of decent people can really understand.
Okay, let's
Um,
agree. Very broad creativity. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. There will almost always be something there. Even your accountant. I mean, famously, accountants can be very creative depending on who they're working for. So, with that in mind, right, what we should start to look at is like how do we kind of we've kind of touched on this a little bit already, right? But we want to look at like how we develop that understanding, how we like develop our understandings of how to go about doing the creative thing that we're doing. And we've talked already about like we draw it from the sociocultural worlds that we inhabit, we draw it from every interaction that we have in a sense, right? At some level. But when you kind of it's interesting to kind of take that right back to the start of like sort of early childhood, right? So how do we because it's often the case, right? And you will have found this, Jakob, probably with yourself and with people that you've spoken to and stuff. Almost everybody that pursues a creative practice is like their primary goal in life
Mhm.
has has kind of shown tendencies towards that from a very, very early age, right? From early
Yeah.
childhood. Everybody that you speak to will have the same kind of stories. And those early years are obviously they're really well known to be really, really formative, right? In terms of like the person that you turn out to be. And that's why it's probably best not to get too creative with the parenting. Just be a loving parent, be supportive, it will work out. All right.
What do you mean not too creative?
Well, you don't want to like, I don't know, start raising your kids in the woods or something, right? Just unless that's your lifestyle, that's your culture. Like
Uh-huh.
me in Newcastle, if I had a if I had a kid with somebody, I'm not going to go and raise that kid in the woods because that would be mental, right? Okay, so
Well,
don't do that,
if you
right?
want to have a very exceptional individual or yeah, very individualistic individual, then that's maybe the way.
Whatever, man. If it's your culture, I mean, for me, I wouldn't do that. But it's everybody's different, okay?
So,
So
okay, just a little bit more about, let's say, if we want to have like a, let's say, normal kid, but quite creative, then should we be just like very loving and just stimulate it with different hobbies?
I'm not really an expert on parenting, Jakob, so I'm
Okay.
probably not the person to touch. I'm going to give you that classic academics answer, but I mean, we are just speculating and just riffing around the idea. So, yeah, I mean, I would hope that being a loving parent is very much the starting point.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, so anyway, what you'll find, right, is those early years obviously really, really, really important, right? Because obviously they represent like the kind of initial exposures, and it's through the parents almost always, and then school, and then friends, for some universities, or for others the workplace, or whatever. Okay, but certainly those early years, right? And what you're starting to do at that very, very early age, okay, is you're starting to develop these psychological tools. Okay, you're starting to develop these mechanisms in the mind which help you to understand how to go about doing the things that you want to do. In our case, we obviously we're talking about creativity. We're kind of getting into developmental psychology a little bit, so it's not really my field, but um, it's been shown through various bits of academic research that people have predilections towards certain stimuli, if you like, right? And they start to show early childhood. So, what I mean by that is if you talk to a lot of visual artists, they will often say that they were very sensitive to things like color as a child, or the parents would have told them this. They're very sensitive to things like color, shape, I guess space.
Mhm.
Um, and when you talk to musicians, they'll often say that they were always had an attraction, a predilection towards like toys that made a noise or sounds, right? I mean, I did. All of the toys, really, many of the toys that I had when I was a little kid that I remember now were like to do with sound in some way. Okay,
Mhm.
and like, and this is sort of fairly well proven as far as I know, but again, not my field. But that's something that you will find. So we start off already with this kind of innate psychological predilection, right? And that when that's fed into in early childhood, if that's done in the correct kinds of ways, you start to develop these mechanisms. Okay, and it takes a long, 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 long time usually for those mechanisms to mature because children, of course, generally speaking, aren't exposed to very, very diverse influences, very, very diverse cultures. I'm speaking generally, of course,
Yeah.
always exceptions. So it takes time and exposure to many sort of different elements that come to make up that understanding. And what will happen is eventually that will develop and become mature, usually around early 20s is when it tends to happen, but it can be like late teens or it can be later for some people. It depends, when you start off being creative, it's individual, but we tend to find that it kind of starts around early 20s ish, right, or like late teens. Um, and that development of those tools continues throughout your life because you're always being exposed to new ideas, to new cultural products, to new people, to new conversations, new dialogues. Hello, Tilly. Are you getting involved now? No. Okay. Because we're constantly we're getting exposed to new things all the time, or we should be. We should be seeking them out,
We
right?
should.
Because they're interesting and they enrich our lives. Yeah. So that continues throughout life, and it's a continual kind of process of evolution, and it's a continual set of interactions that we're having. Okay, and that's why you'll find that, like, I mean, there's actually some quite important implications for that in a creative sense because it means that you can never go back. So there's an old saying that you can't step in the same river twice. But what that means, of course, is because the river is constantly flowing, you're never going to be stepping in the same water. And that's a really important thing to understand as an artist because if you go back and try and trade on previous successes, if you go back and try and repeat the things that you did in the past that worked very well for you, if you're consciously trying to repeat those things, that's like you're trying to live a falsehood in a sense. Okay, you're trying to repeat what can't be repeated because life is it's not recursive in that sense.
That can bring a lot of frustration, and I can know it from my life. Like,
Yeah,
you've did something once, wow, there were great results, and you think, oh, if I repeat it, then it will be cool again. You
yeah.
do this like
I've done it.
two or
I've done it
three
loads
times.
as well. Yeah, yeah. It doesn't work. Don't try.
Too
Don't
many
ever
factors,
try and
too
do
many
that.
factors.
Yeah, there are. But basically, the reason that it doesn't work, right, is because it kind of goes against the nature of being human in a lot of ways. So don't ever do that, you audience, or whatever. Trust me, I've done it. I spent years trying to do it, and it was a fucking nightmare. Don't do it.
Yeah, but on the other hand, many creative people, including me, have a nature of keep trying, exploring new
Mm,
things. Like whenever you've achieved something, you say, okay, I did it. Now it's time to explore
yeah,
something
yeah.
new. And as a result, isn't it even more harder to replicate your success if you are keep starting from the beginning, kind of?
Um,
What do you think about it?
yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's a case of it being more harder because to me that seems a little bit like something being a bit pregnant because it's like it just is it's against your nature. It's against our nature as humans and our nature as creative beings. So you can't be like a little bit against it in my head. In this sense, it's quite polar. Um, so yeah, I mean, because the continual evolution that you're talking about is kind of the natural thing to do in most ways, in almost in pretty much every way. And so obviously, if you're trying to like go against that by repeating yourself,
Mhm.
then you're going against the ways that your brain wants to take it, right? The way that your practice should evolve. So yeah, I mean, the long and short is don't do it. Right. So what you'll find is that like as we as we sort of develop, right, as artists and as we kind of sort of bring what we're doing out into the world a little bit, you'll start to and this starts very young as well, you know, it's this is where we draw our information from and our ideas from. You'll start having these kind of interactions maybe a little bit more widely. You'll start to kind of understand how the cultural field that you're working in, you'll start to kind of understand how that functions a little bit, and you'll start to understand how how it works in terms of like its value systems, how well, what it means to be creative as a part of that field, what it means to contribute something to that conversation, that particular dialogue. Because remember, creativity is always a dialogue. Okay. So those interactions. So again, I'll always default to music. Your mileage may vary. Okay. So if I sit down to write a piece of music, let's say if I'm writing like let's say hip hop beat, right, which is something I've done a lot of. You know, I'll think a lot about, or well, not think, but my subconscious will go to like producers who I really like. So like RZA, Alchemist, DJ Premier, you know, and all the other influences and stuff that I like stuff like Björk and Radiohead and all that type of thing. You know, they'll all kind of get involved. But the main ideas, I guess, that I'll draw from because the piece that I'm making it with an understanding that it fits into that cultural field. Okay,
Mhm.
but it's my perception, as we talked earlier, right? It's my translation of what makes up that cultural field, right? Because I'm a catalyst, right? I'm a catalyst for my understandings of fucking whatever, right? Um, so I'll kind of so I'll be kind of looking at the kind of cultural field and kind of working within, I don't want to say boundaries, but working in what I perceive to be certain guidelines within that area. All right. And that helps to give what you're doing structure, right? If you're going out and if you don't have that, if you're trying to make something without any sense of what field, broadly speaking, or combination of fields, broadly speaking, that it fits into, it's just going to be a mess. There's no context for it. Okay. So there's always we've always kind of, it might be the most amazing thing ever, okay? But in order for somebody to view it as amazing, they have to have something to compare it to. So if you're doing work which literally, and this is almost impossible, literally cannot be compared to anything, how do we know if it's creative and not just novel? How do we know if it's a worthy, kind of idea or concept or whatever, right? So what this means, right, is that the field, cultural field, it acts as a catalyst as well. So by doing works that we perceive as a reflection of that field, the field is informing our reflection of it. So the field itself is playing this kind of active role of informing the dialogue that is our creativity, right? And almost as a sort of defining force for it, or a kind of a shaping force. So there's an interesting point on this, right, that I think about quite a lot in terms of like how fields work, right, as a catalyst, as a defining force. And there's loads of examples of this throughout history, right? So Botticelli, the sort of Renaissance Italian artist, Botticelli for hundreds and hundreds of years, right, was seen as a good artist, but not kind of really anything particularly special. Okay, he wasn't talked about in the same terms as Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, all the other Ninja Turtles, right? Sorry?
Raphael.
Yeah, Raphael, Donatello. I mean, I don't know very more Renaissance artists than that, but I grew up with Ninja Turtles, didn't I? So right. Anyway, Botticelli, right? He wasn't seen as in the same category as those guys, right? And it wasn't until about the mid to late 19th century when art critics reappraised his work and kind of said, "Oh, actually, this dude's fucking great," right? So right, it's not as if Botticelli's work had changed, right?
Mm-hmm.
During that time, it was the perception of that work had changed, okay? The understanding within the field of what made a quality creative product changes, right? And because of that change, Botticelli's work, we looked back, the art critics looked back upon it and went, oh, this now fits our definition of what's amazing, you know? And you'll see that, time and time and time again. Another example is there's an amazing 1960s album. Do you mind? Sorry, just a cat. So there's this amazing album by the Zombies called Odyssey and Oracle, right? 1960s album, like psychedelic sort of rock thing. Tilly, please. Yeah, if you see me like dipping down here, it's because the cat's trying to do something ridiculous.
That's fine.
So it's this amazing like psychedelic rock album, right? It's brilliant. You should all go and listen to it. Odyssey and Oracle by the Zombies, wonderful, great summer music as well. But that was released in I think like 1967, 1968, and what else was happening in 1967, 1968 is you had the fucking Beatles and the fucking Rolling Stones and the fucking Kinks and the fucking da 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 and on, right? So you had all these amazing bands that just kind of obscured it. It kind of got forgotten, and there was legal issues and stuff like that. And it was people basically took it and tried to compare it very directly to what people like the Beatles and the Beach Boys and so on were doing, and they kind of said, "Oh, it's not very good." But then late 90s, early noughties, something like that, people kind of went back to it and went, "Oh, actually, when you judge this on the standards that we have now, I guess, right, or like on its own merits or whatever, like this is actually amazing, and it is. It's a fantastic record." So, in a way, that's kind of similar to Botticelli, right? It's not that the work changes, the context for the work has changed. And therefore, our understandings as members of that cultural field have changed along with the collectivized ideas that make up that field. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this phenomenon also happens like kind of in contemporary art because we do not have like a time perspective. Something that is extremely appreciated right now. In 20 years, it can be completely like ignored, and things
Hmm.
that are being ignored right now, soon they can be like, wow, and said that, oh, this is amazing. So this is the case for contemporary art that you have no idea or very little idea of what it's actually like that meaningful, and the context is changing.
Yeah, so it's really, really difficult to predict. like where those trends within a field are going to go. If you can learn to do that, please let me know because we will make a lot of money.
I
Um,
will.
but
The
yeah,
same, the same. You also can let me know, yeah.
sound. All right, mate. Yeah. All right, let's do. Yeah, bet, man. We'll do that. Right. Um, yeah. So it's very, very difficult to predict. So what that means is that when we kind of start making something, we, we have an idea of what we're kind of drawing from and ideas of what we're going to do, but we it's quite difficult to predict the right way to kind of go about actually making that piece because you can't think ahead in that sense, right? You can't sort of say, right, I'm going to make something that'll be amazing in 3 years' time because that's mental. But I suppose the point I'm trying to get onto really is how we go about actually creating creative works, right? Creative processes, right? So the ways in which that we understand inform what we're doing and the ways in which we actually do that are unique to each individual and each understanding and so on. But they're all drawing from the same pool of literally everything ever. So there's a couple of ways that you can kind of go about doing this. And I'm kind of go back a little bit to kind of academic ideas now. Is you can either start with a little brief. You can start with a brief of something that you want to do, something that you want to accomplish, or you can kind of sort of sit down and just go, I'm just going to make something, right? There's kind of slightly different approaches, all right? And what's interesting about those two approaches, though, is there's a kind of cyclical relationship between the two, all right? And they'll tend to layer as well and so on, but I'll go into that in a minute. So this kind of cyclical relationship, yeah. So many of the artists that I've spoken to who are really, really accomplished people will say things like, I like having a box to break out of. I like having a brief and then being able to go beyond that.
Hmm.
And that's really interesting because by sort of starting with a concept that you want to achieve, right? You set yourself this sort of goal, but you'll find that 9 times out of 10, the thing that you end up making will be absolutely nothing like that, and that's fine. That's a good thing. Okay, if you're just working to a brief all the time and just working to meet that brief constantly and exactly, it's not it's creative, but it's probably not that satisfying in a lot of ways. So what'll happen, right, is you'll start with this brief, this problem, if you like, right? You'll start working on that, and in the process of working on that, you'll start to find these areas where you're sort of developing your own take on what that brief means. So you're going from being in the box to being outside of the box. Okay, you're exploring new ideas as a part of that weren't part of the initial idea that you started working. Okay, and you'll end up in this cycle. So you're sort of in kind of working through these sort of looser sets of concepts and things. You'll start to discover something else, a new element of the thing that you're working on, where you'll kind of think, oh, I should do this element in this new box. Okay, and then you'll start working on that, and then eventually you'll reach a point where you go, oh, actually I want to go beyond this box and just go off on explore and do kind of discover my own problems, right?
I have a
And
question about it.
yeah,
So if we start in a box, then do you think it's important to actually master that box first? Because what I've noticed is that sometimes some people want to try something completely new without having like much skills or sorry, understanding of the thing.
yeah.
Would it be
um
very like useful to actually master it first so that later you can like break the rules with
no
the huh?
I see where you're coming from, right? I mean, the idea of mastery is a kind of nebulous one to start with. But I would always say to anybody, like, just fucking do the thing. Don't worry that you might not be doing it in the correct way.
Mm-hmm.
Just do the thing, right? Otherwise, really, like, how are you growing, right? How are you going to develop the understanding that you need to do something in the correct way if you don't do it a lot of wrong ways first, right?
Mm.
Or you might be incredibly talented or incredibly lucky and just hit on the right kind of ideas right away, and that happens. And it's not very common. It does happen. Um, so no, don't limit yourself like that. Just go and do the thing. Don't worry. If somebody calls you pretentious or if somebody says, "Oh, you shouldn't be doing that," what you do is you tell them to fuck off, right? Do the thing. Always do the thing, right? It's the joy of life, yeah, and
I will
it's the
take
joy
this
of
advice to my
creativity in a
heart.
lot of ways. Sorry.
I will take this advice to my heart.
Yes, it's that's part of the pleasure of it. Is in going out and going right. I'm going to wear this hat today, right? And and that's a really really valuable part of the process and a really really valuable part of learning. So the concept of mastery, if you just engage with it and enjoy doing it and just keep doing it and put the hard hours in, creativity is hard work. It's a job. Like it is, it's something that you have to work at, right? And in order to learn to be able to kind of develop new areas, new ideas, and things like that, you at some point are going to have to go down that road where you're just going, all right, this is completely new to me, but fuck it, I'll have a go, and you learn through that, and it's brilliant and it's fun. So yeah, I mean, when you're kind of in the process of doing that, right, what you'll find is if we go back to the box analogy, is that you'll find that like the layers of like problems and sort of solutions and ideas and things will start to layer because obviously there's different elements in every creative work, right? Um, you'll find that they kind of layer and they're kind of asynchronous. So you might have one element that you're kind of in. Again, I'll go back to music, right? So I might have, let's say, a drum track, right? That I'm kind of in my hip hop box for that. I'm
Mhm.
going, okay, just do straight kind of boom, boom, boom type of thing. So that's kind of in its box. And then I'll have something else on top of that, maybe a bass line where I'm exploring something a little bit different. And it might be less well developed. So they're kind of asynchronous, right? And then you kind of introduce new ideas and new ideas and new ideas, and they'll all be at different points of how well developed they are, how well they work, and things like that. Okay. But it's really important as well is to look at the relationships between them and how they sit together. Okay. So they're concurrent, but they're asynchronous and they're sort of layered. And what that does is that creates a kind of ecosystem. So there's this really, really complex set of processes that we're going through. And they all have these really, really intricate relationships with one another in one way or another. And if you when you start moving them around, when you start to change them, when you start to alter them, when you start to look at them in different ways, when you build boxes, when you break out of boxes and so on, what you'll find is that adjusts the balance of the ecosystem. So one change will have knock-on effects that go throughout the work.
Mm.
Okay. But yeah.
What if your ecosystem is not in balance? Like, what if the
Well,
understandings that you have are in contrast with each other and create like this clash of ideas and
yeah.
you feel like paralyzed? What would be your advice?
Um,
Oh,
yeah, that's something that you'll find a lot. Because as I say, right, they are asynchronous, right? They're not necessarily always going to work together, okay? But what you do is you keep developing them, you keep working on them, and you'll find that even if there's this extreme tension between elements, you'll find that either, ways that will resolve that tension naturally through the process of working on them, or you'll find ways of possibly more interestingly incorporating that tension into the work.
mm,
But what you're sort of looking for is a form of balance, right? You're looking for a sort of point where you can step back from it and go, that's good enough, right? It's impossible to achieve perfection. You're never going to be able to balance all the ideas within a piece in such a way as there can be no improvement. It just doesn't happen. So don't try. I mean, don't what you'll find is that when you're working on something, it will reach a point where you'll go, that's close enough. And close enough is good enough, you
mm.
know? As long as you've put all the right kind of effort into it, as long as you're happy with where it's ended up, that's good enough. So the point is, we have these layers of ideas. They're all going through various different stages at various different times. But what we're looking for is, a balance in the force, right? To use a Star Wars analogy. We're looking for the point where it's good enough, where it does what you wanted to do and you feel happy with it. That is the end game. And even that can be quite difficult to achieve sometimes.
Mhm.
But that's ultimately what you're aiming for. And, when we kind of achieve those things, they represent, they're a crystallization of the dialogues that we're having with the infinite sets of ideas that make up who we are as a person, who we are as an artist, how we understand our practice. Okay. We are creating these moments in time, moments in emotion, moments in understanding. And the cool thing about art, and art in particular, actually, is that they're these very kind of tangible representations of those things. They're snapshots of how you were feeling, or the ideas you were having, or the things that you were thinking about, in that place, in that time, in that context, and that's really that's quite beautiful in a way, because that allows you to step back from it a little bit and just reflect on it. And then, down the line, I mean, I occasionally go back and listen to music that I made years and years and years ago. And I still, I enjoy listening to it still, right? Because firstly, some of it's quite good. And I kind of listen to it and go, oh yeah, I remember when I did that cool thing for that. And that's really satisfying. But again, right, it's like looking back through an old photo album and just going, oh, that was a good time, or oh yeah, I remember that because it meant that to me, and that's one of the beautiful things, actually, I think, about making art. But I think the coolest thing with that, right, is that we're experiencing that as artists, right? But all the artists that we listen to, or go to a gallery to see, or whatever, are doing the same thing. And that's really cool, because it's like you're going through somebody else's photo album then, okay? Somebody else's emotion, somebody else's experience, right? And I think this is probably most directed music in a lot of ways, because it seems to engage with us. To me, it engages with me in a kind of, in a way that almost bypasses the conscious mind. It's just, you feel it. I feel it very, very strongly, and it's like, what we're doing is experiencing other lives. We're experiencing other concepts of existence. So what we're doing is we're kind of stepping into this other world for a moment or two, and we're having this dialogue where we're comparing that world with our own, because we are looking at it from our own context, right? And our own slice of the pie of understanding, yeah? And we look at that, and it's this beautiful kind of dialogue that takes place where you're experiencing this entirely new thing, but it has meaning to you because there's elements of who you are that resonate with elements of the work. Usually, if it's a work that resonates, a lot of the time, a lot of times things don't, and that's cool. That's fine. It's not for you, no problem. Okay, there's still merit in it for somebody else, and that's brilliant. But yeah, I find that's one of the most satisfying things about consuming creative works, right? Is that it is like stepping into somebody else's shoes, sort of, for a little bit of time, and that's kind of beautiful. And I think it makes you, I think, a more open-minded and empathetic person, because you are going out and you are saying, right, let's, I want to have all these amazing experiences. I want to reflect on these crystallized moments of somebody else's life, right? That's super fucking cool, right? Do that. Okay. I mean, we all do it. We're doing it right now. Okay. We're always, it's wonderful.
Exactly how we have a conversation right now. It's very similar when you're actually interacting with
hmm.
the artworks. It's also like a conversation, but the flow of the exchange of ideas, it's like kind of going one way, but then once you experience it, then you start to develop on it. So it's different type of conversation. Yeah.
It is. It's the difference is, it's really, uh, the conversation we're having right now is a direct interaction.
Yeah.
But when you look at a piece of art, you're having an indirect interaction with the artist and the artist's experiences that they've expressed and crystallized, that then you've gone and experienced and then filtered through your own filters, right? So like it's still a conversation. Remember, creativity is all about conversation. So every interaction that we have is, okay, we're one step removed from the artist. We are steps removed from the artist's influences, the artist's understandings, and so on, which again are dialogues, and so on and so on and so on and so on, and it just goes off exponentially, right? Um, and that's, yeah, that's fascinating to me. That's one of the best sort of parts of it, is kind of just going and being open-minded and going, well, that was a fantastic experience. I don't know what it meant to me, but or maybe you do know what it means to you, and that's even, that's better, I guess.
I'm actually very thankful that you reminded me about this idea of like an artwork or like any creative piece as a documentation of
Mhm.
who you were and who you are like right now. Like I remember creating some of the works or my friends, and after some time they were like just annoyed with it and like feeling a little bit ashamed of what they created.
Mhm.
And what I'm telling them is like, this is who you were at that time. This is what you were interested in. This is what you were passionate about. This is a really interesting documentation, expression of you as an individual at that point in your
Mhm.
life.
Yeah, I mean the reason for that frustration, which does occur, and it's typically due, I find, to um, it's a frustration that, I mean, I do this all the time. I'm in no means criticizing. It's a frustration that you weren't able to express that as clearly as you would have liked, you know? And that's a question of technique a lot of the time. And we all have flaws in our technique. Even the best artists in the world have limitations. And in slightly different, kind of going off a little bit, if you learn to work with those limitations, you'll often find that something cool will come out of it. But yeah, certainly stuff that you're not happy with, the frustration is, I think, that you're not expressing it as clearly as you think you could have or maybe should have. And that's, yeah, I get that quite a lot still, and I think everybody does. Um, but because ultimately what you want to do, right, is you're wanting to be a part of the cultural dialogue that's going on as a part of the field that you're working in, or the fields that you're working in, or the kind of wider senses as well that we've been talking about. And it's about leaving a mark, right? Creating something is right. Ever since, right, the sort of caveman, there's amazing cave paintings. I think it's like Lausanne in France,
Yeah, yeah.
and even all those tens of thousands of years ago, right? Just thinking about those early humans, right? Huddled in a cave, kind of flickering of firelight and so on, and they had the tools and the means and so on to express their reality of life and their experiences at that time in that place, and the things that were important to them. And so we see things like the horse, very important. The animals that kind of lived in the area that were maybe food sources, things like that. I mean, I haven't seen those paintings in a long while. There's a lot of stuff with horses and I think buffalo and various other things, or the European name for it, which escapes me. Similar thing.
Bisons, there's some
Now,
deers.
bison's US. Anyway, so
Okay.
if we think back to that, we're seeing expressions of their crystallizations of their moments in time. Okay, but we're also, I think, one of the main motivations really for creativity is to leave a mark, is to say, I was here, I existed, right? My existence had meaning. Okay, and that's a really powerful thing, right? Because ultimately, right, if right, look at it one way, right? Like there's the universe that we exist within, right, is infinite and meaningless and chaotic, and like it's absurd, it's so far beyond
What?
what we even have the comprehension to comprehend that we need to comprehend, right? It's just fucking don't even try that shit, man. We're not equipped. We are not equipped to do that, okay? And in a way, that's really fucking bleak, right? Because it's saying, look, nothing you do matters at all, right? and on a cosmic scale, none of anything that you do will ever matter, right? That seems bleak, right?
I'm
But
going to cry tonight.
no, right? When you think about it a little bit more, and this is one of the core ideas you'll find in like existential. Oh, hello, Tilly. In sort of existential philosophies, right? So people like Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus, Dostoevsky wrote about it quite a bit. This kind of idea of the fucking meaninglessness of existence, right? When you come to understand or kind of realize that really that you don't matter in any way, it's actually tremendously fucking liberating, because what that means is that you're free to create your own meaning within that. Okay? So we're only equipped to understand what goes on around us, our day-to-day lives, and the things that matter to us, right? And really that's all that you need. But in terms of like the deeper meaning, because there is no meaning, that means we are free to ascribe our own meaning to it. And that meaning for me is really straightforward. It's things like being kind to people. It's things like living a good life. It's things like trying to achieve my potentials in the things that I want to achieve the potentials in. And that is something that really drives us. We're not probably not consciously aware of it for most of our lives, or perhaps ever for some people, certainly not as kids and youngins, teenagers and whatnot. We don't have that kind of perspective. But yeah, I think that's a major driving force, is that idea of like just saying you were here, of marking your existence, of painting in the caves, of whatever. Okay, that's in a sense, right? It's a meaning making. It's a kind of it's almost a kind of proof to yourself of your own existence and your own identity, and being able to step back from that, and you can go, yeah, definitely existed. That is a thing that I made. It exists, and that's nice. That kind of tells us who we are, relative to the rest of society, relative to, I guess, all of cultural history in a way, relative to the creative fields that we're working in, relative even to the vast and infinite, unknowable and meaningless fucking realities of existence, right? And that's good. That's a positive thing, right? Because that's almost like we're almost coming. I think it helps us come to terms with the unknowable nature of everything. You know, we can kind of go, yeah. Ultimately, I have no fucking idea what's going on in the grand scheme of things. But look, I made a thing, right? And that thing is a little bit of meaning, and a little bit of meaning, even if it's just a little bit of meaning to you, is a very valuable thing. And that
It's
is,
like a, yeah, like a strategy of trying to deal with that absurd. Like I was thinking, like some of us, when we create things, and you say you create a mark,
hmm,
but then what if that mark is something that no one ever is going to see? If you feel like screaming in the void, then
hmm.
you kind of
You get it out of
empathize.
your system,
uh,
don't you?
you like highlighted how everything around you is actually so meaningless, and like in a
Mhm.
on the cosmic scale,
Yeah,
nothing
it's
doesn't
meaningless, but at the
matter.
same time, we ascribe meaning to it, and that's really important. So it's meaningless, but it's also incredibly meaningful as well. You
So is it
know,
like important that it's meaningful for us? Like,
well, I think everybody's different. Most people go through lives don't even think about things like this, and fair play to them. I wish I was one of those people in many ways, right? But like, yeah, the value really is a subjective thing. It's the experience is entirely subjective, and it's a question of whether you feel the need to find and establish your own meanings, or to make your own mark. And I think certainly I think people want to make a mark in a lot of ways. When it comes to like the deeper meanings of existence, it's kind of different question. But I mean, things like having children, right? That's making a mark. That's propagating the species,
hmm.
and most, or I don't know, the majority, whatever, of people do that. So it's all about leaving a mark, propagating, leaving things for after we're gone, and all of this sort of stuff. It's a very powerful motivator, and in doing that, we're really kind of learning more about ourselves. We're learning more about the nature of what we do, of who we are, of how we understand things, and and yeah, and that's really valuable. It's self-growth ultimately, and it helps you apply a little bit of meaning to something that is inherently meaningless, you know?
I can give a small advice to our listeners is
Yeah,
that when you're trying to create that meaning, don't wait for other people to say if what you're actually doing is meaningful or not.
yeah.
Don't try to externalize it. Instead, focus on those internal feelings. Like if it's important for you, if you find it satisfying,
Sorry, I'm
meaningful,
just throwing things around the room here.
then that's completely enough. Like don't make your passion, your obsession depend on the people out there because people don't care. If you are
Yeah,
going to make it
people are
depend on
busy.
them,
Yeah,
then
man. Yeah, that's no, I agree with that entirely. Yeah, it's very much a personal kind of journey. And you are right, most of the time nobody will care, and that's fine. You know, if you can learn to be okay with that, you will be absolutely fine as an artist, you know. Um, you know, it's good that we kind of moved on to that idea of that, because I do have a few sort of pointers and things just
yeah.
for like, as I mentioned at the start of the interview, I want to talk a little bit about ways that you can be that bit more effective.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of different ways, and you've hit on one of them, which is just really just do it for for the sake of doing it. Don't wait for validation. You know, just go out and do it. Do the thing. Go and do the thing. The thing's brilliant, right? Um, and that actually kind of ties in a little bit with something that is really really important, because if we go back to what we said earlier about when you know, we were talking about, do you need to achieve mastery in order to go out and try something? It's like no, and nor should you attempt to do so, because you should always try and go a little bit further out of your depth than you necessarily feel comfortable in.
Mhm.
It's actually it's in those points where you're just a little bit beyond your understanding of how to do something that you're probably doing something that's the most interesting, that's the most valuable, most exciting. Okay. So always just try and push yourself a little bit further than you are comfortable being in, or that you feel that you're capable of being in. And you'll find that it is in those areas and in those processes that you start to do the things that are the most interesting, that are the most exciting, that are the most meaningful, and so on, right? Um, that's really, really important. Um, and it's also, again, like we've talked about, you know, in doing that, remember that you're kind of doing it to understand. I say remember, a lot of the time it's subconscious, but you know, if you do kind of feel unhappy, if you're kind of not finding the results that you like, just try and remember that you're doing it for a reason, because there's always value in expressing yourself, even if you know, you're kind of unhappy with the results. It's always a one little step, another little step towards self-understanding. And that's the whole point. That's why we do these things. Um,
I want to come back a little bit to
hmm,
what you just said about yeah, always pushing yourself a little bit more to expand your practice, try something that you didn't actually explore yet. I sometimes see artists or people, for example, even from like the entrepreneurial world, who do exactly what they already know, and you cannot even say that they master the things because even the mastery sometimes relies on actually expanding, on
hmm,
keep building on top of what you already know.
hmm,
But if you are keep doing the same,
hmm.
I see those people like doing very similar style where you cannot see any evolution
Yeah.
that is developing over the years. But what I've seen like uh, 2 years ago and what I see right
Hmm.
now
So
is
yeah, just
basically the same, but just a different topic.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. On that, that's fine. Um, you know, well, you know, the idea of going without out of your depth, the idea of kind of going a little bit further out and trying new ideas and so on, is something that we all experience differently. And so, for the person who is producing works that you perhaps perceive as that you perhaps perceive as repetitious, what you're not seeing is the, or you know, what you're perhaps not understanding is is the process that that artist is going through within making them. So you might not see it as a big leap, but to them it might be. There might, there may be elements within that where which they're just developing a lot more slowly. Maybe a little bit too slowly for the outside observer to really notice. But
Mm-hmm.
um, there is something nice and comforting in continuing to do the things that you do well, and everybody enjoys that. But I still think there is if you look at something that you did 3 years ago and something that you did now, even if you kind of think they're exactly the same, there's going to be stuff in there that's different, stuff that's changed, stuff that's evolved, and so on. So we should never. I don't think it's ever really fair to judge another person's works in that sense. You're always kind of, even if to you it seems trite or repetitious or whatever, it's still a case of just kind of just say, hey, look, there's probably stuff I don't understand the artist's motivations here,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps. I
Yeah.
don't see what they're seeing in it, but if that artist has made it, then to them it must have value, and therefore, we can ascribe value to it. And I think that's really important. And I'm not sort of calling you judgmental, right? I mean, we all do this, right? I certainly, like, I will look at works and just go, it's the same thing like I was doing fucking 3 years ago. Why are they still doing it? Right? And that's it just means I don't necessarily understand why they're still doing it, but they have their reasons, and that's good enough.
But I think it's my way of looking at the world. Like what I always try to achieve in my practice is like keep evolving
Mm.
in a way that it's almost working in a way where I avoid what I've already done. If I see that something is similar to what I already created, then I see it as a kind of a failure of like, for me, repetition is the thing that I'm keep trying to escape from.
Mhm.
But as you
And that's
said,
healthy as well. That's really good. That's a great mindset to have. And yeah, I mean, I think perhaps if you're kind of looking for larger creative leaps, that's a really good way to go about it. But some people aren't. Some people are just creating in their own way, doing their own thing for the sake of their own journey. And to us, that might sound repetitious, but like I say, it's not my journey. Who am I to judge?
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but oh, I mean, I think yeah, as general advice for creative people, I would sort of concur with you and just say, look, try and do stuff that's wild and far out and different. Try new ideas, do different things. That's the spice of life. But at the same time, I would never say to anyone, don't do that because it's like what you've done before. It's like, fuck it, man, it's your journey, it's your thing, do it. And
yeah.
that's good. There's value in everything, really. Um, and it's yeah, I think actually that kind of comes into another kind of point that I wanted to hit on is when you try and a lot of the time I think there's a trap, right? There's a big fucking trap that
Trap, what trap?
yeah, it's a big fucking trap, right? A lot of us fall into it. I did myself many years, right? Of like, and it goes back to that idea of trying to repeat what's successful. It's like trying to fulfill what other people expect of you.
Mm,
So I'll give you an example from my own life. So the first solo album I did quite well. It got really, really good reviews. No, the second album, the first album also got good reviews, but the second album, people go, "Oh, this is great. This guy's really good," and blah blah blah. And for me, fucking sins and in me ignorance, I started to believe my own press. And I started to go, "Oh right, well this is fantastic. On my next record, I must do the same fucking thing, right, to fulfill because the audience liked that, so I'm going to do that, right." And it didn't work. This next record was crap, um, and it took me a long time to realize that what I was doing was I was trying to play to the crowd, right? I was trying to do something that I thought would please other people, and in the end, it just ended up being a black hole creatively. Just sucked up loads of time. I wasn't happy with any of it. Um, and it's a really easy trap to fall into once you start to reach that stage, right, where you've got people going, "Oh, I like this guy's work." When you start to get a little bit of press, when you start to have people buy your records or visit your gallery or whatever, it's really, yeah, in a way, it's quite easy just to go, "Oh, I must try and repeat doing that because that's what people know me for, that's what people want." Don't do it. It doesn't work creatively. It's just it's a fucking yeah. Don't do that. Just do stuff. Do stuff for you. Do something. Doesn't matter what it is. Don't give a fuck if anybody else likes it. do it for you, do it for the sake of doing it.
Personally, I totally agree with you. That's also my approach. But on the other hand, let's say that there are people who disagree with us. People who would say that, oh, if you are keep like thinking only on what you are interested in, and you are like don't give a shit about your audience, then you have almost like no brand. You are inconsistent, and how people can recognize you if you are keep becoming someone else.
Well, that's I mean, firstly, if you're the sort of person who doesn't give a fuck about playing for the audience, you're not going to give a fuck about what that person has to say, right? But um, no, people will
How to
recognize it.
balance those things.
Well, because you develop your own style, you'll find that even if you're doing things that are totally different, there'll be like a stylistic thread that runs through it because it's been made by the same person. So, and that'll come out in all sorts of different elements, different ways that you use your understandings, different ways that you use whatever tools that it is that you're using, so on and so on and so on and so on. So I don't worry about that at all personally. And also, it's in terms of like branding and all this sort of stuff, that's like that's somebody else's job. That's why we have record labels. That's why we have like artists, agents, and whatever. It's like let them handle that. You know, just I don't know, have the confidence in yourself that with practice you'll develop a style, and that will be the thread that holds all your work together, regardless of the nature of that work.
Hmm. There's something that I also want to say in regard to this thing is that recently I was reading the book of Elizabeth Gilbert,
Mhm.
very popular one. It's called The Big Magic, I think.
Yeah.
And there, the very interesting point that she mentioned was about that it's sometimes good to separate your creative practice from your ways of making an income, because in
Mhm.
that way you will have the freedom to actually create whatever you want, and your passion will go in any direction that you actually want, instead of directing your creative practice
Mhm.
to make money with it. And then whenever something that you like, oh, it's actually not making money, you are keep trying to get into the asshole of your audience.
Mhm.
Where yeah, this is a nice way of that
Yeah.
made me understand that maybe yeah, I can make money with something else. I can think about making a living with other sources,
Mhm.
but my practice, this is something that actually should be dictated only by me. If I can make a living with it, that's cool. If I cannot, then that's fine. At least I'm doing something that I love.
Yeah. Um, Yeah, this kind of taps into something that we talked about before we started the interview. But it's also, I mean, it's worth pointing out straight away that making music, particularly, and making art is a fucking terrible way to make a living. It's really, really, really difficult, right? Even some of the artists who I know, who I really look up to, right? Guys who are selling records by the thousands, touring all over the place, all of this, right? A lot of them, the majority, vast majority of them have day jobs because you just can't make a living doing it on its own, right? So, I mean, it is possible. Within music, it's really difficult. I think it's probably a little bit easier in fine art because
Yeah.
the pieces that you make, you can sell, whereas you nowadays you can't really sell a piece of music. Not really, not in the same way that's as a media.
Yeah.
Um, But yeah, that kind of taps into something that we talked about before to start the interview. You were saying that you were enjoying doing a lot of painting because you kind of finished your degree and all that, and you kind of felt a little bit liberated from that. I was saying the same thing. We were saying I was saying, yeah, I've got loads of ideas for tracks. I've been making loads of music since I finished doing my PhD. Um,
Mm.
and yeah, it is. I think that's the quote that you give is a good quote. It's wise. It's kind of correct. If you can't make a living, by all means. If you really really want to make a living with your art, more power to you. I genuinely, genuinely wish you the best. But yeah, I will say that separating them out is makes a lot of sense, and it probably will help you stay in love with what you do a little bit longer and a little bit more deeply. I can't remember who the quote was from. There was I think it was some producer, some famous music producer, and somebody says, somebody asked him, "Oh, do you feel married to your music?" And he says, "No, she's my mistress. That's why I still love her." And that's the attitude, right?
Yeah. Well, for me, I partly agree with that approach of separating those things. Part of me is like really saying, no, you can really do this, like do your best. So my advice for people who are listening it is try it for yourself and keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. Just yeah, it's your journey, right? It's your voice in the dialogue, right? It's your conversation with your inner self, and embrace that and love it for what it is, I guess.
Okay then. Thank you very much for the conversation. I really enjoyed it, and there were a few really interesting points that we've talked about. To be honest, during this interview, I was like already reflecting a little bit, so I really
Good.
had homework for myself to reflect even more. Thank
Yeah, I
you
mean
very
that's
much.
yeah, that's one of the things that I like about these kind of things, these kind of conversations, is that they do make you reflect, and yeah, and there's a joy in that. I enjoy talking about that kind of thing. So thank you for having me and letting me spout bullshit at you for an hour or so.
No, no, it was very valuable knowledge.
Yeah,
Thank you too. All the best with your music projects, with having fun with your cat, very cute one,
yeah. The
and
book is my main
the
thing at the
book.
minute. So
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
so keep an eye out for that. It's a major publisher, so it'll be like in all bookshops everywhere. And it's on creativity, and various other sort of, yeah, it's on the kind of stuff we've been talking about. So looking forward to the process of getting that put together.
I will make sure to read it myself. And if any one of you is interested in Nick's practice, we are going to put his links in the description of this video. So I think Nick will be more than happy to answer some of your questions or maybe start exciting collaborations.
Certainly, if there's anybody that wants to get into a dialogue, ask questions, or sort of yeah, anybody just wants to engage with me and stuff, I guess they could probably go through you, Jakob, and
Yeah, just
you
text me
sort of
and I
go to,
will
you can
give
be
you a
my
special
manager,
answer. Okay. Thank you very much and
All
all.
right, cool. Thank you, mate. All right, peace.
Hey, just three quick announcements before you leave. First, I would really appreciate your feedback on this podcast. I'm still experimenting and I would love to hear your opinions. So please leave a comment or just you can directly message me and don't forget to subscribe. The second announcement, I want to remind you to join Creative Minds Lab. It's our community. We have a Facebook group, and there you can share your works, you can connect with other creative, like minded people. And the last thing, we are still looking for new creative speakers. So if you have any friends, or maybe you would like to share your knowledge, then you are more than welcome to look at our website, link in the description, and there you can suggest a new speaker. It can be you, or it can be someone who you know that has really valuable things to share and they are very creative. That's everything from me. Stay creative.